We are here live in the Founder Streams Club, and we are talking today with Mitch Joel. But before we get to him, I want to introduce my lovely co-host, Paris Mansouri, and we've been doing this show now past 2 months. So this is episode number 9. What we do is we interview amazing build that, and I'll let you do the honors of welcoming our guest.
And truly what an honor it is. So this week we're joined by Mitch Joel, and likely one of the few people whose intro and accomplishments alone could take the whole hour if we really wanted to cover everything. Full disclosure, Mitch is one of the few Clubhouse people I've actually had the chance to meet in person. We both live in Montreal. We kind of sort of run in similar circles, but we never actually had the chance to meet. But other than that one meeting, I'm on the same page as you and being really excited to have an hour with him to get his insight and expertise on marketing and branding. He is a global marketing expert. He's the founder of 6 Pixels Group, an advisory investing and publishing company focused on the intersection of technology and consumer behavior. He is also a best-selling author, a keynote speaker, a columnist, a journalist for iHeartRadio, Harvard Business Review, Inc. magazine. He also has his own podcast. Strategy magazine has called him one of North America's leading visionaries, and brands like Google, Starbucks, Shopify, GE call on him when they want to decode the future. And in a parallel life, he's a music and entertainment journalist, a magazine publisher, a broadcaster, 20 plus years, over 25 countries, over 3,000 employees later. The insights and takeaways are truly priceless. He's helped people and brands make a name for themselves. He has, written books about it, written books about how to do it and how it can be done. And this week, he tells us what it takes to get it done. Mitch Joel, welcome to Anybody's Game.
Happy to be here.
Clubhouse, on YouTube, but where else are we? Everywhere? We're everywhere.
We are almost everywhere. Yeah, we are on here on Clubhouse. We are on YouTube. We're on LinkedIn and Twitter. So for those in the audience, if you want to see what we look like or you want to watch this later, you can go to any one of those channels overall. So yeah, Mitch, thanks so much for joining us.
We're on and off every platform. It's great. Happy to be here. Nice to see you, Jonathan. Good to see you, Paris.
Always a pleasure. So I'm going to kick it off. This is a question that we ask all of our guests, Mitch, and I can't wait for your insight. In a world where social platforms are driving communications and marketing, information and culture, do you think it's possible for anyone, whether you're a journalist, a founder, an entrepreneur, a subject matter expert, to make it and gain an audience? Do you believe it's anybody's game?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I think when I started doing this, which was, you have to go back to about 2002. I've been in the blogging and podcasting game since then. I really felt, and it was really the premise of my first book, 6 Pixels of Separation, that everybody is connected, so connect your business to everybody. That literally was the subtitle of the book. And it was long before we had many of the platforms we're using right now to communicate. And what I loved is this idea that anybody can, in text, images, audio, and video, short form, long form, live, pre-recorded, have an idea and broadcast it to the world. And I lived and breathed by that ethos, and I lived and breathed it because, as you mentioned, prior to really being in this space, I was a music writer. And as you know, because you're in the media, you spend a lot of your time pre-internet, for those of you who are old enough like me to remember, being told no. Just no, no, no. And you had no audience. It was impossible to build an audience before the internet unless you were going through what Seth Godin would call these gatekeepers, whether that was the 3 major networks, whether that was magazines, in my case, or radio. And it was very illuminating when blogging came along, because I felt, well, I don't need an editor or publisher's permission to put my message out to the world. And it worked, and it worked really well. And in those days, you could, use, if you had any sort of search acumen, which I did because I worked at one of the first search engines before Google existed, I knew how to write things and phrase things so that I could trump even branded names by just writing a post about them or mentioning it a couple times. So the answer to the question would obviously be yes, but it's not really yes, because if you fast forward to where we're at today, what we actually see are very monopolistic behaviors. You have very few places where you can really go. If you think about Facebook, you might have built up a following on a page, and then because Facebook wants to amp up their advertising revenue, they're throttling how much of your audience, even though they've liked or followed you, that you can reach. And you see that on LinkedIn, you see that on other platforms. So do I believe that you can still come onto a place like Clubhouse, for example, and build a following? Yeah, I mean, I think you can, and clearly you're seeing that. I think what we're also seeing is a ton of fragmentation. And I think it's unrealistic to believe that it's anybody's game, in the sense of, in order to really get that message out to a broader audience, there are new gatekeepers, and those gatekeepers are there. And yet, and still, you'll have somebody like a Joe Rogan come along, whether you like him or not. You will have voices that come out and can work within that, but it's more costly than it was before. So it's a yes and no. Is it anybody's game? Sure. Is it anybody's game? I mean, we're in a bunch of worlds of unregulated monopolies, so you could argue both sides.
Yeah, it leads us into, really, and you touched on this a little bit there too, as far as how branding plays into it, as well as marketing. And, there's personal brand, there's your company brand, and so forth. So just to kick things off, what's the difference, and how should people approach branding and marketing, whether that be together or differently? How would you go about that?
I mean, they're all monsters and beasts onto themselves. A brand is how people collectively feel about you in a very simplistic way. Your marketing isn't just your advertising. Your marketing is, I still believe in the traditional 4 Ps of marketing, of product, price, promotion, place. So how does it all interplay? I mean, it's everything. It's everything. What business do we know that has been successful without really understanding their product, their price, how they're building their promotions, and where they're distributed? What businesses do we know that have done things in order to reach an audience that didn't have elements of having a sentiment that we or a public can all get behind, and a feeling that we can all get behind? So I've always been a big proponent in building a brand, because I ultimately do think that brands win. In terms of marketing, it's such a massive and fragmented beast now. And when I often get asked that question, Jonathan, my usual feedback is I don't know if the person's asking about marketing or advertising, because, to me, advertising for a long time really was the 800-pound gorilla of marketing. And I think that its place and power within the marketing unit has diminished significantly because of things like brand, because of things like storytelling, because of things like businesses not having to shout loud to a generic audience to get people to pay attention. And we do live in a world where more sophisticated people who have a perspective on marketing really feel that advertising is the tax that businesses pay for a suckier product or service, which, is a fair argument. I don't think it's a precise argument.
It's so interesting because it is
an ongoing argument, and depending on who you speak with, the vantage point is different, and they're going to come at it with a different perspective. So I'd love to know, when it comes to personal branding, which we're hearing so much these days and in recent years, how do you approach personal branding versus product branding? Because so many people want to have their own brand, but they're also launching their own thing, whether it be a jewelry line or a course or, whatever it may be. It could be a product, a software, a service, whatever it is. It just seems like these days, like just even a conversation around, should I have a personal Instagram or should I have a business Instagram? So I'd love to know your macro perspective on personal branding versus product branding.
Well, I can tell you my personal journey, and maybe within that there'll be some reactions from people in terms of how they might want to think differently or conduct themselves in a different perspective. So I found myself in 2000 joining this digital marketing agency called Twist Image based here in Montreal, which existed. There were 2 other owners and a couple of employees, not many. I became a third. We inevitably had a 4th partner and grew this business. And in 2000, again, in 2 or 3, we started this blog. It originally was called the Twist Image blog, and it became 6 Pixels of Separation, the Twist Image blog. And what happened through this is, and again, you have to go back to 2002 to understand that this wasn't really being done all that much. But we really believed that if we put a human voice onto the business, it might differentiate ourselves from where other marketing advertising agencies were at. Usually the people like me who are thinking differently about how the industry can be are the ones that the agencies would keep in the dark corners of the office. And they would really only let the client, senior client, have access to this person because that's the secret behind the curtain. And we decided early on to really blow that curtain out and have there be a face. It happened to be me, be representative of where we see the industry and how it's going. And again, you got to go back to then. People were not spending a lot of money on digital. People were still asking questions like, do I really need a website? I mean, all the things that we've overcome, in close to 30 or over 20 years of work. And what we realized early on is it would be very easy for the ego to be inflated. And for me to spend most of my time just doing media appearances and writing and doing the podcast. And what we decided to do was to build a portfolio brand strategy where we were managing actually 3 brands. We were managing Twist Image. We were then managing what we called 6 Pixels of Separation, which at the time would be the blog, the podcast, speaking events, book deals, media appearances, all that. And we were also managing this personal brand of this individual, which just happened to be me, Mitch Joel. And I say it like that because it was very much for me a separation. I wasn't looking at Mitch Joel as me and like, what do I represent? It was very, very real and very, very true. But I also knew that it had a persona. That persona, would be swearing. That persona wouldn't be talking about any brands, right? Because you never knew when a CMO, chief marketing officer from one brand would go to another brand. You never knew whose work would come up for bid. And suddenly you can't be bidding on this airline because you were busy trashing them because your flight was delayed 2 days earlier on Twitter. It didn't make a lot of sense. And so through years of working and figuring it out, we came to this place where we were managing ultimately all 3. Now, what happened to the business is we had a blog and a podcast. I was writing articles for other places like Harvard Business Review and Huffington Post at the time. I was doing radio appearances. I had a book deal. 2 books came out, speaker representation. These were all clients that the agency was managing. And it was a very unique model. 1 is it became very successful for us. 2 is it became very lucrative for us. Now, the lucrative part of it was really interesting because instead of being in a place as an agency, you don't really advertise. I mean, you show up in the industry trades, hopefully, but you don't really advertise. You don't really see agencies advertising. So what happened is, or traditionally what happens is you pitch for work and you win a small fraction of it. And business development is a very costly endeavor in the business. I could run certain pitches that were hundreds of thousands of dollars and you didn't win the business. But because we had this content engine that was generating income and that was essentially our marketing and our advertising and our communications and our PR, it wound up becoming a significant client of the business, which was offsetting all the money you're losing when you pitch and don't win. And so it was really, really different to be in that place where there was a model at play. Now, again, this is like pre-Gary Vaynerchuk. And so I watched, Gary Vaynerchuk come out, and we had done a lot of events together in the early days. And when we met and he told me he was opening up VaynerMedia, my real comment to him in a positive way, wasn't negative, was what everyone's going to be looking at is if you can do for their brand what you did for yourself. Because he had established his personal brand so hard out of the gates with millions of followers that felt like the promise. Like, oh, if we're Under Armour and we work with VaynerMedia, we're going to have that type of success. And that can be a tough hill to climb. Ours was different because we were already working with clients and introducing them to things like websites and microsites and social and commerce and mobile and all these things. that it was almost like our brand was growing with our client's brand, while at the same time there was this personal brand that was creating value and throwing things into the market. So when I think about like, what should I be doing? I've always treated social or anything out in the media as being very personable, but not personal. And I think that there is a big nuance between the two. So people don't know if I'm married, if I have kids, where I live, what I really do. I don't really try. I mean, I get more personal as the years wane on and I get older. But to me, it wasn't about that. It was about being personable. And by being personable, what that means to me is my ability to create value to anybody who interacts with me. So right now, I'm not here to promote how great I am and you should hire. I don't want any of that. What I want to do is provide enough content that whoever is thinking about their personal brand, their business, whatever it might be, now has newer tools to think about how to be better at it. So I'm less about self-promotion and influencer than I am about creating value and using the other revenue streams and angles to benefit from it. So then we grew the business. Montreal, Toronto became one of the larger independent agencies in North America, sold it to WPP, which is a big player. It then becomes Miram, which becomes a 3,000 person, 30 country office, whatever it was. I finished, the growth of the business, do my whole part of my contract, left about 2 years ago. And then the 6 Pixels group was really just my ability, thankfully, from WPP to take my content, continue on investing, advising, speaking, doing that. And even in this position, I don't try to monetize, I'm using air quotes for everybody on Clubhouse, my thought leadership. I do that in other ways. I get paid to speak, I get paid to write, I've got my investment and my advisory. That provides that. This to me is my give. And that's why after all these years, I still do my podcast, which I think is the longest running business podcast in the world, probably, because it's been 780 episodes or whatever since whenever, and I haven't stopped. So that's the way I think about it. But I'm also self-aware enough to know that the way I think about it isn't at all how people tend to be thinking about their personal brand when they're on Clubhouse or doing YouTube. So, as Seth Godin likes to say, your mileage may vary.
See, I'd love to know
because we've been talking about personal branding, and I love that you went through the history and where you started out. Because in case some people are not aware, I mean, you started blogging when most people didn't even know what a blog even was. So it's just, I love that we get to have you on today, because especially when we're talking about social media and where we're at today, I love that somebody like you can superimpose it, juxtapose it with how it was when we first started out, and when these platforms and these resources were made available to us. So you started out in marketing and branding long before you were even able to think about what social platforms would allow you to do and the extension that it allows in the marketing and branding sphere. But as someone who has had experience in both environments, extensive experience in both environments, what do you think some of the common traits are? Because a lot of people are like, in this day and age, anyone can do it. Anyone has access. Everyone has access to audiences if you just are consistent. So I'd love to know from someone who's done it in both worlds and has had success, what are some of the parallel and the common points that people can actually thrive off of?
Again, Paris, you're asking like really meaty questions that probably would fill tomes of books, right?
Yours.
Yeah. In a simplistic way, here's the framework. I think it's reasonable to say that there are many people who believe that fame is a job, that just having a lot of followers on a myriad of platforms through ad revenue and then getting them to do something is the job. And I think that that's true. But I also think that we live in a world where you have carbs and protein, right? And some people love carbs, I know I do, and some people love protein, I know I do. But the trick is to figure out the balance of a healthy diet. And so if you're all carbs, me, celebrity, I think it's light and it may not be as satiating long term. I think protein, to me, that is that longer play where you're really providing value. And I think that from my own perspective, it's what I'm more attracted to. And the analogy that I often speak to people about, because they'll call me and say, I want to start a podcast, or I see what you're doing on Clubhouse and I want to be a moderator, blah, 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 blah. One is all of the stuff that we're doing right now looks like anybody can do it. But that doesn't mean that everybody can do it. I spent from the years of 1989 up to the 2000s, as you know, Paris, because you were here in the market, interviewing thousands of real busy people, rock stars, where you're lined up in a row at the hotel and you each got 15 minutes, and you realize after you do your first one, like if I just ask them about their new album, the producer and the tour, they're going to be completely bored. And it became a game for me to figure out ways to engage them in conversation and to not have them be repetitively bored. All of those reps and years of doing that 10, 15, 30 times a week might make this look easy. Whether it's me on your side asking the questions or on the receiving end. This is not an easy thing to do. In fact, it's a skill that I wish they would teach more young people to do. How do we teach these people to stand up cogently and communicate a message and a story in a captivating way that would make people want to stick around, listen, engage with them, have more information? But the visualization, a more simplistic way, would be like this. If you think about a magazine, I think many of the people right now who are managing their brand are trying to figure out a way to become the cover of the magazine. When I think about a magazine, I'm trying to think about how can I write the best stories in that magazine. And actually the subject of the story is on the cover or has the picture. I just get the byline. And when I think about those differentiations or how it's changed, I'm always looking to see if the person I'm speaking with just only cares about being on the cover of the magazine and doesn't understand that if there's not a story underneath it, it might be interesting for the first while. It might be fun to follow you on Instagram, but ultimately, if you're not really saying anything all that interesting and different and unique, I'm not too sure how long that's going to last. Now, if you take that construct and you lay it against platforms that are naturally self-gaming, Clubhouse is one of them. They have these I call them forced followers, but they're recommended, but they're not really recommended. They're implanted. And so you have these people on the platform who have millions and millions of followers on the platform, but none of those people have actually raised their hands to follow that person because they're interesting. They're just suddenly following them. And you see this in other platforms too. Now, that's okay to leverage as a way to get more people engaged with you. But if all you're doing is focused on that number and this fame and trying to almost publish that fame out constantly, I don't know why people follow those people. And there's a lot of them. In fact, a lot of the newer personal brand celebrities, I always say, like, what industry do they fit in? Like, what is their content? Like, who are they speaking to? And very often it becomes this cult of personality, where even if they're in the beauty space, they eventually become just the model, right? They're not really in the beauty space. They're just the model. They're like a face that you look at and go, that face is very pretty or good looking or is using a product that I like. And again, is there anything wrong with that? No, models can make a lot of money. That's great. It's just not the experience I'm looking for when I follow people. What I'm looking for is how they're providing value to me, the audience. Does that answer your question? I'm not even sure I did.
Look, I think it's
so important because it does. To me, it did, in fact, because you're back in the day, you had to provide the value. Like, you were given one shot. You didn't have this long form conversation that you're able to have now. When what social platforms allow us is multiple posts a day, multiple posts a week, possibility of engaging audience, even paying to engage the audience further. Whereas back in the day, we didn't. So we just come back to the story and how it's the story, it's the meat, and it's the value, and it always has been. It just looks a little different now, which I love.
I mean, and the other aspect of it too is if you just want to chunk out advertising, I'm starting to believe that advertising really falls into two categories. It's direct response and storytelling. And in any reasonable way of thinking logically, you would think, well, a strong brand is going to need 50-50, right? 50% great storytelling and 50% direct response. It's going to be able to take action. But if you really look at what we're seeing in platforms like Google and Facebook, it's almost like the direct response is everything. It's like 90-10. And I think that's a natural position to take because it's a direct response. I create a call to action. Somebody takes the action. That keeps working. I keep optimizing and I'm running against that. But on the other side, if you're really not extending the storytelling aspect of it, which is a longer play, it's more of a dripping model. It drips. The drips become ripples. Those ripples become waves. And then those waves can become have that tsunami effect to it. That it's a hard thing to not do out of the gates. And yet, if you really look at where the spend goes, it's driving more towards a direct response model, which, by the way, is why I think there is an attraction to places like Clubhouse now, and there's an attraction to more to YouTube and newsletters, because I do think there's a pushback by the audience saying, I want more, and I want it to be more for me, and I want it to be somewhat private or personalized in a way that I can really, use it, subscribe to it, get it more frequently. Because there's enough direct response out there, people trying to sell their course or their gear or whatever it might be. So that's the other side that I spend a lot of time thinking about as I help people or think about my own brand, because I do very little direct response actually. And that's by design. We talked about that earlier. My direct response isn't really anything other than if you need a keynote speaker, maybe give me a shout. And I'm not really overt about it either. I do operate in a world where I think if you're really over delivering on value, people are smart enough to figure out ways in which they might want to use you more.
Yeah, the value piece is so crucial. If we just think about any content we consume, we're talking very much in like this personal brand context, but any content we consume, whether it be a TV show we like or music that we listen to, there's some element of value exchange there. So, why wouldn't it be any different? When we think about this in this personal brand context. I do want to reset the room really quickly. We are in the Founder Streams Club. Paris and I have a weekly show called Anybody's Game, and that's here today. We interview change makers and leaders in the social space and on business, and people who have basically made an impact through building brand. And today we're joined by Mitch Joel. So we will be opening up the stage to folks in the audience. If you have a question, feel free to start thinking about that and raise your hand, and we'll open it up here in just a little bit. And then if you happen to be listening in Twitter or YouTube, feel free to ask a question there as well, and we can make sure that we ask it here. So next question, Mitch, that want to ask you is, what are some of the biggest branding and marketing mistakes that you see being made currently?
Yeah, I mean, you might have to ask the question. And one is, Jonathan, I wasn't following you, so I'm following you now in Clubhouse. I just want you to know, I'm like looking here going, I'm not following this guy. He's really smart. So thanks for having me, and I appreciate you doing this. And of course, Paris, I always appreciate you. Next thing I want to say hi to Joe Jaffe, who's been going through some crazy stuff with his heart and everything. So Joe, you should come up here. And then the last thing I want to say is I love Clubhouse when it's a conversation and not a Q&A. So I'd love to have people just come up here and just talk. It's so much more fun for sure. What are people doing wrong? What are they doing right? Yeah, they are. And yeah, they are. I mean, every day we see major organizations falling into some level of requirement of crisis management. We're in the middle of crazy times where brands don't know if they say anything, how they'll look, and if they don't say anything, how they'll look. And we're in a time where I think the great stuff is almost really hard to see because there's so much stuff. What I don't think people have really recognized is that in the later, I'd probably say anytime after 2010, about 10 years ago now, which is scary for me, advertising moved a little bit, and it moved from a world of scarcity to abundance. Right? It used to be that if you had a message and you weren't advertising at 8 p.m. on Thursday on TV, you just couldn't reach this discernible market. And what digital facilitated is the ability for any brand to speak to any individual who may or may not have an interest in either that brand, their competitors, or the industry that they serve in a very, very powerful and direct way. But the other aspect of it is just the level of abundance, right? Because you're constantly creating content, and there's more and more pages where things can run, whether they're ads, whether they're content, whether they're sponsored, whether they're influencer based. It became quite abundant. And I don't know that the industry hasn't resolved itself yet on this idea, because you do see these, as Professor Scott Galloway calls them, these unregulated monopolies in Googles and Facebooks and on and on. But the truth is that it is a fairly abundant instead of scarce world. Example would be if you're looking at a specific keyword on Google, there's not just one space for that one search. There's multiple spaces, multiple times you could geographically, there's just tons of ways to slice that one asset. But in the old days, if someone took the front inside cover of the magazine, that was it. You want it next month, you can have it, but you'll probably pay more because you want it, and that person who did it last month wants it too. So it's a bit of a different game when you're like, who's doing it right and who's doing it wrong. I don't necessarily know that there's there obviously is a right or wrong, but there's so much of it that your ability to experiment and to do it in a cheapish way is really powerful. So, do brands do stupid things? Yeah, of course they do. People do stupid things all the time. I mean, we're right now in the middle of a global pandemic, a Me Too movement, a Black Lives Matter, an Olympics. Like, you couldn't ask for a time where I could see more things that brands are doing wrong and we could go through it literally one by one. But I think on the other hand, there would be an argument to be made about effort also. And what I mean by that, as long as they're blatantly not doing stupid stuff, but sometimes just showing up to see how they show up, I tend to not fault brands or even individuals for doing that. If it's overtly stupid, I get really mad for sure. But in general, mistakes can be, I'll say, hidden, right? You could buy a bunch of keywords and blow your budget and nobody would know. You could do a really crappy pre-roll on YouTube and figure out pretty quickly that it's sucking and make a move. So I think there's a lot of nuance in that idea of what you can do. And I wouldn't want to discourage someone by showing you how bad brands can be, because they can be pretty stupid.
Okay, so we will talk about it. I want to definitely move on to the other side of it as well. And that's on the executive side. I mean, we talk about branding so much, but we forget that behind the brands are people who may make mistakes, who may have their own take on what the company should be doing, but they have to maybe toe the company line. You've been recognized as one of the world's leading executive coaches. What are some of the common fixes you find yourself recommending to executives? Let's say common feedback that you are constantly having to do in the past, 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I don't really do executive coaching at all. I know I'm part of this MG 100, and I'm happy to be there, but I do find myself in uncharted territory because I don't do executive coaching. I do provide advice to people.
Yeah, no, what I mean in the sense that, like, when you're going in, I'll give you an example. I've been in situations where I've been brought on as an advisor, and I've been told our people are not on Instagram. And
I mean,
in that sense of having to go and sometimes fix before you can even advise on what they're doing, executive coaching in the sense of helping them understand the marketplace, or maybe somebody who's been at a company for a very long time, hasn't adapted, hasn't acclimatized, maybe doesn't even find the need or the understanding for engaging on a new platform. How do you handle that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's been a lot of years since I've had this conversation. So one story that I would often say is, it's for young people, or this is beyond my understanding, but my business wants to do. This idea that just because I turn on the lights often, it doesn't make me an electrician. So there is a bit of this thinking that, well, you're really active, Paris, on YouTube or Clubhouse, so you must know how to do this. I don't necessarily think that's true. I just don't. I don't buy it. I don't prescribe to this idea that because someone does it a lot, they actually understand the nuance of it, how it operates, or how it can help me really push my business forward. So that would be thought one. Thought two is my reaction to, like, oh, we should be on Instagram, is usually no, you probably shouldn't. What you should do is think about where is your place? And this goes back to what I was saying earlier, this idea of text, images, audio, video, short form, long form, pre-recorded live. What is the type of things that you could do that you could not stop doing, that you would have that level of enthusiasm and eagerness for? So for me, I know mine is text long form and usually audio long form. And if you look at historically what I've done, whether it's Clubhouse or podcasting or article writing or magazines or books, it falls into place. Does that mean that I don't tweet or post to IG? No, it doesn't mean that. I might use those in ways to market myself. I might use those in places where I want to have shorter types of interactions. But I wouldn't do well in a world where I couldn't do my podcast every week or my base podcast every month, or pop into Clubhouse 2 to 4 times a week and take part in longer rooms. I like talking, as you could probably tell. I enjoy this format of media. I like consuming it. I like creating it. And nobody pays me to do it. But if they were paying me to do it and stopped paying me to do it, I'd still want to do it because it's what I love to do. And I think that is often dismissed in marketing departments and with executives. Oh, everyone's telling me I should go and do this. Well, if you're not really good at doing audio, you probably shouldn't do that. If you're not really good at taking pictures or videos, if you're good at writing things, you should be writing more. Create your own newsletter. And that, if you really think about it in a reverse way, doesn't that make the most sense? Like what would you want to get out of a business? Well, the answer is you'd probably want to get out of the business their best. So if the boss is being forced into creating some form of video, but they really love to write, I'd much rather read their newsletter. It's my own perspective on it. And again, it's easy to look at a platform and go, I can do that. But I mean, here we are in Clubhouse. I'm not really paying attention to the stream and the video, although I'm looking at you and I see the cameras on. Clubhouse was really unique and continues to be really unique. And again, Jaffe and I have this conversation often because this isn't a podcast and this isn't a live stream. This is actually 3 people right now on a stage with a lot of people just listening. But what makes it more interesting is when there's 6, 9, 12 people up here, and my job is to be a conductor of an orchestra, right? When I'm doing this live stream, it's not. My job now is to answer your questions or to be the person asking these questions and make sure that what you and I are doing is an engaging conversation that other people are listening into. And so I would almost argue that what we're doing here is kind of convoluted in a bigger way, right? It's like we're streaming, so we're trying to have this one-to-one thing that's of value to people. But at the same time, we're on Clubhouse, which in theory would be more interesting if there were just a bunch of voices and we were orchestrating a great conversation by bringing up Jaffe or asking Jeanette what she thinks, or maybe Jason has a good perspective. But that is a different format than this. And that's why I also think so many people who are successful in other platforms come onto a place like Clubhouse and really struggle because it is a different beast. So if I'm talking to an executive about what platform, it's not as important as where do you tell your best stories? Where do you provide your most value? Where do you think your customers are? Can you satiate them where they are? Because you might think it's long form writing, but they might be an Instagram audience. And at that point, then you have to figure out, well, who are we hiring or working with that can really bring our story to life to them?
I'm taking so many notes.
Wish you should just record this. Wouldn't it be easier? Take notes later.
I mean, we are recording it.
Okay, perfect. There you go. So don't take notes. Hang out.
No, I'm hanging out, but I want to have it for later as well and around at the end of the room. And honestly, as somebody who has had your cross-sector trajectory in your career, from a journalist, like a music journalist, to then a broadcaster and a publisher, and it's just, and as somebody who appreciates that, because we've had conversations, that I've crossed different sectors as well. What do you credit your cross-media success to?
I would always be really interested in people who were leaders in their industry but had no idea who the industry publication editors and journalists were. I'd be shocked. I'd be like, what do you mean? Like, you don't follow the trade magazine and know who the key journalists are? And no. Yeah, I'd be in the music business and I'd interview people time and time again. And someone would say to them, someone on the road, hey, you know Mitch Joel? And they're like, who? And I'd be like, wow, like, how can I be writing in this subgenre of music that you are in, that I've worked with, and you're not aware of that entire world? And that's kind of the reason why I think I've been good at the work that I do, is I'm really interested in who are the voices in the industry. How are they speaking? What do they do? I mean, here I sit almost 3 years after leaving the agency world of marketing, and I still have all my subscription to all my newsletters, and I still wind up bringing on guests who have some kind of marketing pedigree, even though I'm more known in this world of innovation and where things are going. I'm just an infovore by nature. And to me, that's what makes me feel like I'm still relevant, because I'm getting old. It's what makes me care to create more. I'm an infovore. I'm just constantly consuming content and information and media, books, audio, text, whatever I can get my hands on. And then part of it is the fact that so much of it is free. Again, I come from a pre-internet world. If you wanted to read the article, you bought the magazine. If you wanted to watch the show, you paid for the subscription. And the fact that there are so many brilliant voices, whether it's on Substack or Medium or LinkedIn or Clubhouse or podcasting, I'm always blown away. Like people, I remember in the early days of content, I keep talking about Seth Godin because I'm a fanboy and I've gotten to know him over the years. And I just think he's very eloquent and precise in how he quote unquote markets himself. And people will get really up in arms that he wouldn't have comments on his blog. And I was like, shut up. Don't talk about this, because he's going to stop blogging. It used to be 3-4 years in between books. I'd be waiting nothing. Now he's writing for free every day and it's coming to my inbox. Shut up. Just take it, enjoy it, you know? And I feel that way about a lot of things. So I don't even take for granted if I pop onto Clubhouse in the morning and there's not necessarily a room I want to be in. I'm not like, oh, Clubhouse sucks, I can't believe this. I'm like, okay, there's no free content for me here. Like, what? Quit being such a baby. So that's, again, it's a long-winded way of saying, like, I'm an infovore. I'm just constantly interested in learning and growing and following interesting people. And that in and of itself leads to understanding how certain media works and operates.
Yeah, it's I like how you consider that, right? Just the content and it's interesting. It's interesting because we're in a world now where, like you said, content comes out more frequently. But then on top of that, there's this opportunity for the content consumer to partake as a content creator, whether it be through like immediate feedback or, a video dissecting whatever it was, or a commentary, or just doing their own thing. So super interesting. Question for you is, what you might have some tips for people who want to, for professionals who want to brand themselves?
Yeah, I mean, one is how. Again, have you thought about the format? And then are you following enough and reading enough and consuming enough and commenting on others enough that you feel that you really have something of value to say that has a play longer than just this moment in time where you feel like you should be doing this? And even like, if I think, like, I keep referring back to Clubhouse because it's the newer one. But when I first came on, I was really apprehensive to start a room. I would follow other people who I thought were smart. I would maybe raise my hand and maybe come up here on this area and talk. And then maybe I would offer to co-moderate with someone, or maybe I would start my own social or private room. I didn't get overwhelmed with this idea of what's my personal brand. And I don't get overwhelmed with this idea of originality. I think originality is really I think most people aren't original at all. I think the idea is for you to figure out what is your perspective. And even if the stuff you're saying has been said before, it really hasn't, because it hasn't been said by you. And that's a big and important lesson. I think most people don't speak because they're worried that they have nothing new or different to say. Nobody asked you to say something new or different. That wasn't ever part of the agreement. The idea is that you come to a show, a moment in time, a piece of content that you're creating with your perspective. And even if your perspective is similar to others, you're never going to say it the same way. I mean, the three of us can sit down in front of a red barn and I could say, write 100 words about this red barn. And I promise you, none of them would be the same. And all we're doing is staring at the same red barn. So I think it's hugely important to move yourself into the media formats that you're interested in, follow the people that are interesting, really understand what they're doing, how they're doing, how often they're doing it, why they do it, add value there, become valuable there, guest, moderate, then start creating. I mean, you're creating essentially when you add value, but then you can start thinking, well, maybe there is a different type of room here on Clubhouse I could create. And again, like I'm singling him out because he's here, but Jaffe's a really good example of that. Building a weekly room where he's talking about what brands should do in Clubhouse, and then inevitably what brands should do on Clubhouse, not just in it, has given him a really impressive platform. And it's made people like me want to show up. There's people like Estelle Metayer, who runs an incredible room. It's usually every Saturday. Now it's every other Saturday because it's summer office hours, called Trends and Weak Signals, where she just brings together so many interesting polymaths to talk about so many different topics. And she'll pull something out of her hat, and sure enough, 6 people have an opinion, including me. And I always cringed at the word polymath because I wouldn't ever call myself a polymath, but it leads into what you were asking, what Paris was talking about, this thing of, well, what is the media? What makes you interested? What is a brand? You have to really consume a lot and really look at things in a really different and almost academic way. And that's what I think anybody smart should do first, is think about it really academically. Like what is the intelligence level here? Because you have an opportunity to either dumb it down. You have an opportunity to make it way more academic. Look at Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell is a great example of what an executive should do, right? You should spend hours and hours in libraries looking at really obscure research that has never been commercialized and then figure out a way to commercialize it. It's brilliant. Some people hate it, but I happen to think it's just a brilliant strategy of writing and being creative. It's just different. And I love different. I don't need original. I just need different, another perspective.
I love it. And I love the fact that
you're talking about being a consumer and looking at it from whether it's an academic perspective or just taking it and putting a new spin on it. So often we're hearing create, stop being a consumer, stop consuming, look at your screen time, just be wary of it. And I love that you're coming from a perspective of, you know what, being a consumer isn't bad if you have intent behind it. And it's such a great perspective that we don't hear about. So thank you for that. We do have one last question, then we go into rapid fire, but definitely we want to invite you up. If you have any questions for Mitch or a point that you would like to add to the conversation, please do raise your hand. We will be bringing you up. Mitch, I would like to know, what is your most repeated advice? Oftentimes, I'm sure people are asking you, how do I stand out? How do I stand apart from the crowd? And what do you find yourself telling people all the time?
Usually it's a lot of do as I say, not as I do, because I'm probably not the best person to model oneself after. I don't think. So there's that. There's a little bit of that repetition in what I said, that idea of text, images, audio, video, short form, long form, pre-recorded. I feel like that's a very freeing statement for people who think, I need to be on Clubhouse, I need to be on TikTok, I feel like that gives people some real space to think about, how do I really think about content and what it means in the world. And then I think, again, it's a repetition, which is why you're asking, I guess. It's the storytelling aspect. Don't forget about the storytelling aspect. People are attracted to great stories. They might respond to your ad, but what they ultimately want is a really great story that they can wrap their head around.
Love it. Anthony, on stage, we're going to come to you right after rapid fire. Anyone else who has a question for Mitch, please do raise your hand. We'd love to have you up here. Jonathan, you want to start us off for rapid fire?
I sure do.
I will start us off. Yeah. So
How about I'll start us off?
This is very slow rapid fire so far.
Sorry, well, I'm on it. Favorite social platform.
Say that again, sorry.
Favorite social media platform.
Newsletters. Are those social media?
No, they're not.
YouTube. I like YouTube. I'll take YouTube.
Okay, what's your screen time usage?
Too much.
You don't check anymore? The Sunday reports?
No,
the Sunday reports.
No, I don't. I'm afraid. Okay. People laugh. I enjoy email. Like, I enjoy being on my screen. It's probably my downfall.
Okay. So I will note to email you moving forward. An entrepreneur you admire.
Oh, yeah. My favorite entrepreneur right now has got to be my friend Harley Finkelstein, who's now the president and is a co-founder of Shopify. There's no doubt that seeing him start, and I was around when he had an online t-shirt store, and watching him become one of the most powerful people maybe in business has been just one of the greatest blessings of my life. It's an amazing thing to see. I mean, you come across wealthy people and interesting people and all that in my job, no doubt. But to watch somebody just do that has been an incredible journey. So Harley Finkelstein would definitely be my choice.
I found the list. I did. Who's your top 3 must follows regardless of the platform?
Top 3 follows. Wow. Anne Handley would be right up there for sure. Killer newsletter, great content creator. I think Joe Polizzi in The Tilt, he's always doing interesting things. And I would say that if you like Clubhouse and you're not following my buddy Joe Jaffe, who's here in the audience, you should absolutely follow him too.
Love it. Joe, please feel free to come up here and add to the convo. Okay. You can only listen to one artist for the rest of time, Mitch. Who are you listening to?
You music?
Yes.
Okay. That's a really unfair question. Paris, you know that.
It's Jonathan's favorite question, and we weren't expecting to have somebody like you who's a music
connoisseur. So very hard question for you, Mitch. Extra. But you'll get bonus points.
No, I'm just going to go straight down the middle and go with The Who.
Okay. And then you
John
got it.
Commentary. John, do you have commentary on that?
That's a good pick. I know. For me, my genres are hip hop music or any rock before 1993.
I was interviewing a bassist today for my bass podcast, and she's much younger than I am, but she was saying that when she was 13, she made this commitment that she would never listen to music that was created past 1973. And I thought it was both interesting and unique that she chose that year. So I hear you.
For me, it's basically like Nirvana backwards for rock music, and then everything else hip hop. Okay, so the only thing you want what's the one thing that you want everyone to know about you?
That I'm very, very personable here in these channels, but I'm not very personal on these channels, and that if you want that side of it, there's much more happening IRL than there is here.
And that is very true. I find you're incredibly personal when in person, though, I find. Totally. And very personable as well. Very different. Would love to get to our audience questions. Anthony, meet Mitch. Mitch, meet Anthony. You guys will get along. I can't wait to see what Anthony has for you, Mitch. Go ahead, Anthony.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Nice to meet you, Mitch. You have a very esteemed background, very impressive. So it's my honor to meet you. You made a statement earlier about advertising is being split into 2 categories. And that was direct response and storytelling. And I would just ask you to elaborate on that a little bit, if you mind.
No, I'm happy to, and great to meet you as well. If you think about what you're trying to accomplish. You either want somebody to believe in what you're trying to sell, or you're trying to get them to take an action. So if you think about direct response, think about things like Google AdWords, think about things like retargeting. And if you want to think about it in relation to storytelling, I'd recommend you look at somebody like Scott's Base Lessons. Now, I'm warning you before you do this. If you Google the word Base Lessons or Scott's Base Lessons, don't be mad at me, but you will be retargeted from here to eternity with Scott. But it's not going to be a free trial to sign up to his Base Lessons. It might be out of the gates, but if you don't sign up, that's when it gets interesting. Suddenly you are going to see videos in your feed of the 10 times Jaco Pastorius went beast mode, or the 5 basses that changed music forever, and these incredible mini documentaries that him and his team create that I can't stop watching. And that, to me, that longer form of storytelling, whether or not I've signed up to take his online Base Lessons, is a really great example of storytelling. And then here and there, he'll do the whole 40% off, sign up 3 months free, et cetera, which is a direct response. And I think many people focus too much on the sign up 3 months free and don't realize that even with retargeting, you have an amazing opportunity to tell better stories, to really get people engaged in, again, the greater industry that you serve, why you might be the right person to teach them or help them. And I feel like that art of storytelling has got lost. So when Paris or Jonathan asked me about my favorite social media channel, the reason I chose YouTube is because YouTube really is my TV. Like, I subscribe to so many different channels, and when I'm done here, it's 10 o'clock at night, I'll probably crawl into bed, open up YouTube, and search by my subscriptions, most recent uploads, and that is my TV guide. I can music, comic books, comedians, documentaries, whatever content I subscribe to is there, and it is, to me, an amazing form of storytelling that people do to get you to take action to ultimately whatever it is that they're selling. And I find myself very aligned to the brands that understand that balance. But we live in a world where most people feel I can just pound you to death with a Google AdWord or Facebook ad campaign. I don't necessarily believe that to be the only path forward. Is that clearer?
Yeah, it's clear. So it sounds like the base company needs to do some more segmentation and control their cookie duration a little bit better.
I don't know that it's either you're a bass player or not, Anthony. I don't know that's necessarily true. I think you're overestimating the size of that discernible market, maybe.
But the reason why I asked is actually online. So just my background. I started in direct response, really postcards, and I subscribed to the school of thought, David Ogilvy, and I went through, kind of the traditional paces or traditional readings of the ad industry, and then the internet just completely took over. So now I'm like 18, 19, 20. I already have a couple of websites. So I've been in the online space for about 20 years. And I will tell you today, the best ads are actually the two components that you just brought up, merged into one. It is direct response because you can respond at the end of it, and there's usually a call to action. But the best social media ads start by telling a story, captivating the audience, being entertaining or funny, and usually maybe down in the caption or towards the end, there's going to be a call to action. And if you go to, like, just say Facebook ads library, where you could search, Nike or any brand that you like and you're a big fan of, and this is also confirmed with the IAB, you'll see the top performing ads are all user generated, so they don't feel like an ad, but they still are an ad, but they're storytelling with a call to action. So it's kind of the merger of the two.
Yeah, you're definitely seeing the maturation of that, and I think you're right. But there is many startups, and I advise a lot of them, that come out of the gates all guns blazing on the direct response and forget about building a brand because they're seeing a really, really short runway. And I think that sometimes when you're flying with those types of blinders on, it's not necessarily in the best interest of a business that you want to sustain longer over time. And a lot of them have that perspective of, well, Google will just buy us for $1 billion in 6 months anyways. But there's no doubt that the sophistication that you're talking about is definitely there for the smarter, more mature brands and the ones that have budget. But it's also been an iterative component. It hasn't always been that way. And it is fairly new. And I think you're right that the marketers of today are a very different beast than the ones that were trying to figure out how traditional would play in a digital world or how digital would dominate a traditional world. And what you're speaking about is that ultimate hybrid. It's the ones who are now creating within that system and know how to work that system in a way that's compelling. Now, with that, I would also argue that there are so many brands that are still not at that level of sophistication. But totally, and that was my point, is that the brands that get it right are the ones that have the balance between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to do both. In your retargeting, you should turn your customer testimonials into a story format. And yeah, you definitely need to do both. If you're not doing both, I would imagine it's more of a straight sell, affiliate offer, impulse buy. It also totally depends on the industry, if it's B2B, B2C, and the price point. But you could do really well with just direct response. If you're dealing with a B2C impulse buy, low price point, you could do really well with that. But yeah, so it's case by case. But,
I mean, my business partner, one of the 4 people that were at my agency, their background was building one of the largest direct response agencies in the world that was very data driven. They launched some of the original loyalty cards, and there's no doubt that you could live only in that ether. But if you're new and you're thinking about how to build your brand, I think the stuff you're talking about resonates more with me, that balance versus choosing one and only focusing on one.
That's a great point. That's a great point, Mitch. And also the other thing that you mentioned, you see the storytelling aspect of marketing today is also actually a lot less costly, because direct response, you're typically going to be running some type of advertisement, but you can build communities. You can go on Reddit, you can go on Quora, you can go on Facebook, you can go on Instagram, you can go on LinkedIn and build a group. So if you're really good at creating content that's engaging in an asynchronous or synchronous way, and you can do that in a storytelling format, you can really build a strong brand. And your cost per acquisition, your brand enthusiasts, they're going to come from those communities in an early stage. So I tell every startup to do that in the beginning.
Yeah, it's a bit of a bear trap, though, because all the Reddit and Quoras of the world are hard to measure out of the gate. And when they spend $1,000 on Google, they're seeing what happens right away, and that becomes that drug, and that becomes the problem. So you're right. If they can see that you got to be that cheesy in it to win it, and be a part of it. I mean, I believe in that. Obviously, if you just look at the way I create my content, I probably index higher on the storytelling than any other side of it. But the problem is it becomes the drug on the other side of just seeing every click and every link. That becomes somewhat problematic when you're telling them, no, spend a couple hours a week on Clubhouse. It's just, it's not for the weak of heart, but I think it is for the strong of brand for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, one of the biggest things, and I know we have a listener down in the audience, Glenn, one of the biggest things that marketers don't do today is they don't understand attribution. And they're looking, so out of the box, Google Analytics will default to the last click and assign goal value to the last click. But there's a tool called attribution modeling where they give you first click, last click, and there's one called linear. Now, linear takes a weighted approach across every touch point in your marketing channels and distributes the value of that conversion equally across the board. If you do that with proper UTM tracking, you can track any medium, whether it's a Quora or a Reddit, doesn't matter. So I think it comes down to, if you're a modern marketer and you understand analytics and you understand attribution modeling, you could absolutely scale in any medium on the internet.
Yeah,
it's all very clickable.
And that's why you should hire Anthony to do your stuff.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I love this conversation.
We're all like not even satiated. The meeting of the minds. Loved it. I see Rajan is on the phone. Before we go to his final question, I would love to know, Mitch, what would your question be? What would you like to ask our audience if they could think about as they go about their day?
I think Simon Sinek has taken too much grief through the success of his whole idea of start with why. But I think that why is a very underestimated question. So if you're thinking like, I should really spend time on Clubhouse, why? And keep asking why until you really believe that there is an answer. So I'm not framing it in the same way that Simon Sinek is, because his why is the core of your actual being. But we tend to not really be critically thinking of why we're actually doing something. And I'll tell you, which may run in opposition to what Anthony was just talking about, that I've never looked at the analytics of my podcast. And the why to that is because I'm not doing it to build audience. My podcast is a very selfish act where I can choose somebody whose book I like or whose book I'm interested in and spend an hour talking with them over a coffee that I just happen to be recording and sharing with the rest of the world. So whatever happens at the end of the conversation isn't really of interest to me, believe it or not. But that's the why. Why do you keep doing it? Because I love that conversation. And I'm somebody who happens to collect conversations. So if you can figure that out, you'll know that. So like when I thought, why do I do this? Because I like to collect conversations. It's 10 o'clock PM here where I live in Montreal. And, I should be in bed right now because I'm old. And the reason I'm not in bed right now is because I like these types of conversations. So when Paris and Jonathan invited me to take part in this, I was like, hell yeah, I definitely want to have these conversations.
Well, we're glad you said hell yeah. Thank you for joining us. Before we wrap, Mitch, what are some good ways that people can stay in touch with you, contact you, follow along with what you're up to?
Oh, it's very easy. MitchJoel.com or 6pixels.com or just Google my name. And I'm very, very accessible and very happy to respond and connect with whomever.
Awesome. Well, Mitch, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Paris, always a pleasure to moderate and interview folks with you. So thank you so much. We are in the Founder Streams Club. Do make sure that you're following the club. Give Mitch a follow if you're not following him yet. And we do rooms like this every single Tuesday at 6 o'clock Pacific, which is 9 o'clock Eastern. And we also do a whole bunch of rooms here in Clubhouse. So definitely want to get to know you all better. We talk founders, startups, investors, and content. So thank you. Paris, any last words before we wrap?
Listen, this was honestly such a masterclass. And like I said, we could have spent just an hour on Mitch's intro and all of his accolades, accomplishments, what he's done. Mitch, thank you so much for this privileged hour. It's been incredible. And honestly, I know Jonathan mentioned if you're not following Mitch, but seriously, the rooms that you hold, I have not seen anyone be able to hold a conversation the way that you do in your rooms and foster the conversation ongoing, and just your ability to engage. And obviously it's a testament to your knowledge, your skill, and your expertise, but seriously, some of the best rooms on Clubhouse. I'm just grateful that you spent this hour with us tonight and we went over. And I totally appreciate that you didn't cut the time, so thank you so much.
Well, make sure that you're following Founder Stream and Jonathan and Paris, because I learn more usually by being engaged in the conversation because of smart questions and smart conversation starters. So I appreciate both of you holding these rooms and holding these spaces because I can genuinely come onto Clubhouse often and be quite bored. So it's nice to see quality. And so as long as there's quality, I will be around. So thanks to both of you, actually.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, everybody, I hope you all have a fantastic evening. Well, everybody, hope you join us here next week, and we will talk to you. And we will talk to you all soon. Thanks again, Mitch. Thank you again, and Paris again. I'll see you next week. Good night, everybody.